Life feels meaningless? Good. That's where real meaning begins. I know that sounds like nonsense, but psychologists discovered something counterintuitive. The moment you realize life has no fixed meaning isn't when you break, it's when you become free. Here's what most people get wrong. We think meaning is something we find, like a treasure buried out there somewhere. But research from positive psychology shows that people who create their own meaning, who consciously choose their values instead of inheriting them, report higher well-being, lower anxiety, and even longer lifespans. Meaning literally changes your brain's reward pathways. Philosophers like Sartre and Camus figured this out decades ago. They said existentialism isn't about despair, it's about creative freedom. When you strip away false sources of meaning, social approval, status, wealth, you uncover raw truth. And in that truth, you can actually build something real. Camus put it perfectly. In the midst of winter, I found there was, within me, an invincible summer. So if you've ever had that quiet, hollow moment when life just stops making sense, that ache isn't a verdict. It's an invitation. The question isn't, what's the point? It's what will I make the point? Let me show you how meaninglessness becomes the doorway to something truer. According to LiveReal.com, the belief that life is meaningless is one of the most pervasive illusions of modern life. Not because life is truly empty, but because we've lost sight of how to see meaning clearly. The feeling of meaninglessness often arises when our external goals, relationships, or roles stop giving us the satisfaction they once did. When we confuse temporary purpose with enduring meaning, we set ourselves up for collapse the moment those temporary things shift. And they always do. Psychologists describe this as an existential crisis, that deep, disorienting period when you start questioning everything. Who am I? What am I doing? What matters? PositivePsychology.com explains that these moments are not mental breakdowns but openings. They are the psyche's way of clearing space for something real, a more authentic connection with life itself. But before we go deeper, let's pause on a distinction that often gets blurred. Loneliness, depression, meaninglessness. They're related but not identical. Meaninglessness is the sense that, at its core, life lacks purpose or coherence. Existential depression, on the other hand, is what happens when that sense of emptiness becomes emotionally overwhelming. When you not only think life has no meaning, you feel it in your bones. Here's where philosophy becomes medicine. Patrick Whitehead, writing on Medium, reminds us that existentialism isn't actually about meaninglessness. It's about meaningfulness. Existentialists like Sartre, Camus, and Kierkegaard didn't deny meaning. They simply rejected the idea that meaning is given to us from the outside. Instead, they said, you have to create it yourself. And that's the paradox. The more we look for meaning out there, the more it slips away. But when we turn inward, when we accept that meaning is something we cultivate through choice, responsibility, and engagement, we start to see the world light up again. So where does this leave us? Let's look at what the science says. PositivePsychology.com points out that meaning isn't a mystical state. It's measurable. People who report a strong sense of meaning show lower rates of anxiety and depression, stronger immune systems, and even longer lifespans. Meaning literally changes the brain's reward pathways, activating areas associated with motivation and emotional regulation. When you have purpose, your body and mind work differently. That's also why meaninglessness feels so heavy. Your nervous system recognizes disconnection as a form of threat. The absence of purpose doesn't just dull your spirit, it creates real physiological stress. We are wired to seek meaning like we seek oxygen. LiveReal calls this the illusion gap, the space between our conceptual understanding of meaning and our direct experience of it. We often live in our heads analyzing life instead of living it. The more we think about meaning, the more abstract it becomes. But meaning itself is not an idea. It's something you feel when you're aligned with what truly matters. So how do we get there? The first step is honesty. Admit the void. The existentialists never told us to run from despair. Kierkegaard called it the sickness unto death, not a literal illness, but the deep awareness of being separated from our own potential. When we deny that feeling, we numb ourselves. But when we face it, something remarkable happens. The despair itself becomes a doorway. Camus put it beautifully. In the midst of winter, I found there was, within me, an invincible summer. The realization that life has no fixed meaning doesn't destroy you, it liberates you. Because if meaning isn't given, it can be made. Every moment becomes a canvas. Whitehead explains that existentialism doesn't end in nihilism. It begins there. When we strip away false sources of meaning, social approval, wealth, status, we uncover the raw truth of existence. And in that truth, we find creative freedom. We can act, choose, love, and build. Not because we have to, but because we get to. Positive psychology's research echoes this philosophical insight. People who consciously choose their values, who define what matters to them rather than inheriting meaning from external sources, consistently report higher levels of well-being and resilience. They're not immune to pain or loss. They just understand that suffering itself can be meaningful when it's integrated into a larger story. That's the essence of what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the capacity to find strength, wisdom, or new direction through adversity. Meaninglessness, paradoxically, is often the seed of transformation. When your old meaning collapses, it clears space for something truer to emerge. So what can we actually do when the void opens up? Here are 3 simple but profound practices drawn from both psychology and existential philosophy. First, engage directly with life. Don't wait for motivation. Action precedes meaning. Volunteer, create art, learn something new, or help someone else. The smallest act of engagement reconnects you to the fabric of life. Second, practice radical honesty with yourself. Allow the hard questions. What am I afraid to face? What values am I living by that aren't really mine? Meaning grows in the soil of truth, not comfort. Third, embrace paradox. Life contains both joy and suffering, creation and decay, meaning and absurdity. You don't have to choose one. Meaning emerges when you hold both with open hands. As Whitehead concludes, existentialism isn't a philosophy of despair. It's a philosophy of courage. It challenges you to live authentically, to create meaning even in the face of uncertainty. And maybe that's the whole point. The universe may not hand us a script, but that doesn't mean the story's empty. It means we are the authors. So if you've been feeling the weight of meaninglessness, take it as an invitation, not a verdict. Somewhere beneath that ache is a spark waiting to ignite. Meaning isn't something you find, it's something you build. One choice, one connection, one breath at a time. Thanks for watching. I'm glad you're here, because that, right there, is already a start.